Abbeville, a recent graduate of Abbeville High School, Jonah Cooley, is heading to Clemson University, where he's going to study political science. And he wants to be a government lawyer. Wow. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I went off to college except go to college, right? But to have that vision is wonderful. Jonah, come on up. The microphone is yours. He is going to give a message for young adults.
All right. I'd like to start out by thanking Bill Kimler and the Greenwood County Democratic Party for having me this morning. And to everyone who was at the meeting Thursday in Abbeville, I promise I'll try to mix it up a little bit so you don't have to hear the same speech twice. So, as Bill was saying, my name is Jonah Cooley. I'm a recent graduate of Abbeville High School. This fall, I'll be going to Clemson University to study political science. And I was not born into the Democratic Party. My parents met at Erskine Theological Seminary. Both of them are here this morning. And they are both lifelong Southern Baptists. My dad, in fact, is a Southern Baptist minister. Interestingly enough, though, he's what's called a bivocational minister, so he has another job on top of that, and his happened to be working as a civil servant 5 days a week. So maybe that's where I got the early stages of my interest in government. And they've both never really been partisan in any way. Neither of them ever officially joined any parties. They both voted on both parties at the local level. They both voted for, I know, Floyd Nicholson and Ann Parks, they both voted for. But at the national level, they've generally leaned Republican. They could definitely be described as conservative Christians. But they always wanted me to make sure that I could come to my own conclusions on the issues. And through my teenage years, I really early on became interested in theology and politics, which you can imagine made me very popular in school. And it led me to a realization that I shared virtually none of their values, or none of their views at least. They're both Southern Baptists. I'm a Presbyterian. Neither of them believe in same-sex marriage. I do. They don't believe in anthropogenic climate change. I do. And while they align more with the Republican Party, I am a registered member of the Democratic Party. Nevertheless, our views are largely born out of the same values, the same belief in service to others that I believe once defined the United States of America. Fundamentally, this nation is not facing a battle of views. We are facing a battle of values. We're facing what historian John Meacham once called a battle for our better angels, the soul of America. We are seeking to again declare to the entire free world what it means to be an American. In order to win this battle, we have to recruit young people in this country. I don't know how to break it to you. Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi are not Benjamin Button. They're not getting any younger. We have to be able to win over young people in this country, but more importantly than that, we have to get them to understand why does government affect them? Why does it matter for a 15-year-old to even care what's going on in the government? And as part of that, we can't win them over with some sort of an idealistic reminder of a past that they're too young to remember. They don't know what the 1960s were like. They don't remember LBJ or JFK or MLK or anyone like that. They weren't alive then. I wasn't alive then. And we can't deal with the situation that Bill Maher keeps calling Ruth Bader Biden, where all of the progressive leaders hold on to power for too long, often to the detriment of the country, like the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg did. And we also can't win over young people with candidates that they have no way of relating to. It's hard getting a young gay black woman to vote for an old straight white man. I will admit that to you. But we have to also be willing to show them a positive vision for the future of our country. And we have to inform them of the consequences of any inaction. As Bill was talking about earlier, Project 2025 is a new agenda for the conservative movement published by the Heritage Foundation, which I would point out has influenced every Republican president since Ronald Reagan. Many of the other proposals in Project 2025, other than the ones we've already discussed this morning, include extending the 2017 tax cuts, which Congress would estimate would add $4 trillion to the national deficit by 2028, abolishing the Department of Education, eliminating the independence of the DOJ, FBI, FCC, and Federal Trade Commission, making all of these agencies subject to the complete control of the president, which they would have be Donald John Trump, and invoking the Insurrection Act so that the president would be able to use military forces against American citizens, changing tens of thousands of civil servants to at-will political appointees so that they could be replaced with party loyalists, like the Soviet Union, and prohibiting Medicare from negotiating drug prices, establishing internment camps for illegal immigrants, curtailing the bipartisan infrastructure law of 2021, eliminating Head Start and school lunch, and as Trump himself put it, claiming that Article 2 of the Constitution grants him, quote, the right to do whatever as president. When I was 14 years old, the entire world was shut down. A pandemic was raging through the entire human population, and more Americans were killed than during the Civil War. At the same time, our nation was facing a reckoning with discrimination and injustice after the brutal murder of several young black individuals. And the whole world was watching while our president gave solutions to these two problems. Inject some disinfectant and get over it. When I was 15, this country voted to replace that president. And the president had other ideas. So I was forced to watch in horror with the rest of my country while the United States Capitol was attacked. Feces was smeared on the walls of our Capitol, and our legislators were threatened with their lives. The attack on January 6th was what galvanized me to finally pursue a career of civil service, because I could no longer idly watch as my country was given away to such chaos. The United States of America has now been around for 248 years. And most of those 248 years have been a battle for our better angels. What I like to consider an equal match between contradiction and compromise. Our founding fathers, who were wise for their day, were comfortable writing that all men were created equal, and then later writing the 3/5 compromise. President Lincoln was willing to offer a new birth of freedom for the enslaved, but not for natives. Even Lyndon Johnson, to his credit, was willing to give black individuals in this country more freedom, but also send their young men to die against their will in Vietnam. I'm not bringing up all of these contradictions to condemn or cancel the founding fathers or Lincoln or President Johnson. Instead, I'm bringing these up to highlight the battle between progress and regress, the difficult path behind us and the difficult path we still have in front of us. None of these individuals were perfect. They weren't demigods hovering among us. They were just Americans. They were people willing to stand up to do what they thought was right for the country. In his farewell address, General Washington recognized that he had likely made mistakes during his presidency, saying that he was too sensible of his defects, not to think it probable that he may have committed many errors. Whatever they may be, I fervently beseech the Almighty to avert or mitigate the evils to which they may tend. I shall also carry with me the hope that my country will never cease to view them with indulgence, and that after 45 years of my life dedicated to its service with an upright zeal, the faults of incompetent abilities will be consigned to oblivion. Washington recognized he was nothing more than a citizen, willing to do what was right for the good of the nation. President Obama recognized the same, saying in his own farewell address that he wanted the people not to believe in his ability to bring about change, but in their own. Today, the American people don't seem to believe in their ability to bring about change. Even more troubling, they don't seem to believe in the ability of one another. We are mainly suffering from what President Carter once called a crisis in confidence. We have become a culture and nation so enamored by material possessions and wealth that we are willing to sacrifice our very humanity for it. There is a reason why Donald Trump is so popular. He does appeal to a trend among our citizenry. We have become the country of reality shows and depravity. In a lot of those same ways, he is exactly what we tell people not to be. Greedy, self-absorbed, impolite. He has had life handed to him, and then he looks down on people who've had to work for what they have. He referred to John McCain as, quote, he's a war hero because he was captured. I like people who weren't captured. Everybody probably remembers when he said that. That should have been the end of the line, right? It was supposed to be. Or when he referred to dead veterans as suckers and losers. That was supposed to be the end of the line too. Or the Access Hollywood tape. That was supposed to be it, right? Everything is supposed to be the end of the line. He is the Teflon president. If he doesn't win, the system is rigged. It's like when you're on the playground in kindergarten and all of a sudden some kid gets tagged and I don't want to play anymore. All of a sudden, as soon as the game's stacked against him, he doesn't want to be a part of it anymore. But the difference is that kid on the playground can't instigate a coup attempt against our country. He's turned the Republican Party into his own fan club, and he's turned our government into the politics of personality. He spends every speech and debate talking about his own supposed accomplishments. And completely lying to the American people. He wants us to believe that January 6th was just normal political discourse, that our lives were better when he was president. I want you to take a journey back in time with me for a second to 2020. Do you really think your life was better in 2020 than it is right now? The prices may have been lower, but it didn't really matter because you couldn't find anything on the shelves, including toilet paper. And things may be bad right now, but Walmart still has Cottonelle. And the gas prices were lower, but where were you going? Everything was shut down. You know, I remember 2020. I remember back to March of 2020 when I was leaving school for the last time. I didn't know when I was going to go back. I remember, you know, not knowing if I was ever going to see any of my friends again, looking outside the car window. $1.28, thanks, Trump. No, I didn't care about gas prices. I cared about the fact that I could die soon. That was what I was worried about in 2020. He allowed the pandemic to get so out of hand in this country. It was the worst out of any developed country on earth. More Americans died than during the Civil War, which also means, by the way, more Americans died than both world wars combined. Many of you here today likely knew someone who died from COVID-19. I did. The pandemic got so out of hand that we had to shut down the entire country. And as a result, people were out of jobs. So our government, both the Trump and Biden administrations, had to send untargeted stimulus into our economy. In economic terms, that meant that the supply side was completely shut down and the demand side was dramatically increased. So obviously we are going to have inflation. Couple that with tariffs imposed by the Trump administration, the war in Ukraine, and unregulated corporations taking the opportunity to price gouge, and it's no wonder that we are in our current economic state. In fact, it's frankly a surprise that we're not worse. Of course, the way out seems to be surrendering our economy to a man who's filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 6 times. Or surrendering our government to a man whose advisors, this is absolutely true by the way, they would put his name into his press briefings as many times as possible so that he'd pay attention. Because he is that self-absorbed. He would have you remember his presidency as a simpler time where nothing bad ever happened, and remember January 6th as being legitimate political discourse. It's like that quote from 1984 that the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. That was their final, most essential command. This is an appeal to the cynical vision of America as a depraved, easily manipulated country that is incapable of self-government. He wants to create our government and country in his own image, directly flying in the face of what John Adams once called an empire of laws, not men. In response, the Democratic Party has given us Joe Biden, who is a family man who has devoted his entire life and career to this great country. I'll be honest, I do understand the reluctance to vote for Joe Biden. He was frankly never my first choice either. If we're being honest with ourselves, the first lawmaker he worked with was probably Moses. But I know it's an old joke, and Mr. Bryson and Ms. Brenda had to listen to that Thursday as well. After his performance at the debate, I was one of the Democrats panicking, wondering who was going to replace him on the ticket. Kamala Harris, Gretchen Whitmer, Warnock, Newsom, anyone in America, really. Our party has tried to convince the people of this country that we didn't witness that performance. But if we continue with that, then frankly, we are no better than the MAGA Republicans who'd have you believe that January 6th was nothing, or that the transgressions of the Trump administration didn't happen. It's easy to criticize them, but if we want to be honest and if we really want to help this country, we have to be willing to do some self-reflection and criticize ourselves as well. And wonder, how did we get here exactly? We've now heard from prominent Democrats across the country like Michael Bennet and George Clooney for some reason that the president should step off of the ticket and allow another candidate like Vice President Harris to replace him. And while I doubt I'd be the deciding vote for the party, I'd like to submit my thoughts on the subject. This election is about a battle for the soul of our nation. President Biden has said that since 2020. It is the most important election of our lifetimes, and there cannot be any mistakes, inaction, or complacency. This election is about our nation, and to me, that is more important than Joe Biden and Donald Trump, Democrat and Republican, and my own life. We have spent the past few years as progressives applauding our Republican friends, like John McCain, Liz Cheney, or Adam Kinzinger, who broke party lines to uphold their values and their commitment to the nation, including Mike Pence, who did so at the risk of his own life. It's time for us to do the same, because next to our values and our nation, all other issues seem petty. How can we resettle the constitutional right to choose if we don't have a constitution? How can we uphold the rule of law against a Supreme Court who goes rogue and shreds every single law known to man with every single decision? How can we be liberals when liberal democracy has been destroyed? We must do whatever necessary, as John F. Kennedy would put it, opposing any foe and supporting any friend to preserve the long-term success of this union. Still, let me make the following clear. If Kamala Harris is running against Donald Trump, I will vote for Kamala Harris. If Gretchen Whitmer is running against Donald Trump, I will vote for Gretchen Whitmer. If Raphael Warnock is running against Donald Trump, I will vote for Raphael Warnock. If Gavin Newsom is running against Donald Trump, I will vote for Gavin Newsom. And in November, if Joe Biden is the nominee of the Democratic Party against Donald Trump, I will vote for Joe Biden. Because our country should not be surrendered to men like Donald Trump, to his chaos. I know that because of that, people are going to accuse me of having Trump derangement syndrome. But I don't feel like I have Trump derangement syndrome any more than George Washington had British derangement syndrome, or any more than Abe Lincoln had Confederate derangement syndrome. These accusations are going to come from the same sorts of folks, by the way, who carry around mugs that say liberal tears on them, just letting you know. Because for a lot of people in this country, within our own party too, politics is nothing more than a sporting event. It's all about their team winning. It's not about the policy. It's not about making things better. This is what happens when sports fans become interested in politics out of nowhere. And we can easily blame this on things like the 24-hour news cycle for turning our politics into another WWE. All this is to say, I'm not Joe Biden's #1 fan, and I would prefer a younger, more energetic nominee, someone who's fired up and ready to go do the right thing. But in this election, the question facing our country isn't how old we are, it's how old our ideas are. Hate and retribution are the oldest of ideas, and they're also the most un-American. I'm less interested in Joe Biden the man, and I'm more interested in the policies that he can implement. We have to abandon the current politics of personality and return to the politics of policy, because the future of our nation isn't dependent on Joe Biden and Donald Trump. The future of our nation isn't dependent on the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The future of America is dependent on shared values and efforts as Americans that have always held us together. In our lifetimes, we must rebuild the American economy. I'm a capitalist, but I would like to see the capitalism of Adam Smith and John Maynard Keynes, not Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman. We have to have a political and economic system that values and prioritizes the welfare of workers and consumers first, not last. We can no longer rely on the 1% to occasionally allow the wealth to trickle down. We need to enforce American antitrust laws to break up major airlines, banks, retailers, telephone companies, pharmaceuticals, logistic companies, and more. Doing so would reduce costs, it would increase wages, and it would even increase quality by forcing these firms into competition, which is a core component of capitalism. In our lifetimes, we must prevent investment firms like BlackRock from buying properties just so they can make rent more expensive, because, housing wasn't already expensive enough. In our lifetimes, we must end the control of our oil companies over our nation and planet. Currently, one product's cost has dominion over the entire economy. If oil goes up, then truckers have to pay more. And so every commodity that you buy has to go up in price too. We must rebuild our infrastructure in a way that moves our country away from the burden of what I like to call, forgive me for the pun here, the oligarchy. In our lifetimes, we must address the effects of climate change. I truly believe that South Carolina is the most beautiful place on earth, from our breathtaking share of the Appalachians to our very own lakelands and our wonderful share of the Atlantic coast. The beauty of our state and our planet is at stake if we do not begin to move to renewable energy. In our lifetimes, we must protect public education because it's a core component of upward mobility for the lower and middle classes, and we should not refer to our teachers as groomers or say that they have litter boxes in the bathrooms of public schools just so that we can get votes. In our lifetimes, we must protect our citizens from gun violence. The sacred duty of any society is to ensure the safety of its citizens. I believe in the right to bear arms, but why is it that you have to obtain a license to fish or drive or even vote, but not to own a firearm? Is my Nissan Maxima really more dangerous than a Remington? Well, maybe with how I drive, but that's not the point. You may recall that I graduated from Abbeville High School this past May. In Newtown, Connecticut, this past June, there were 20 students who should have been walking across their own high school stage, but 12 years ago they lost their lives at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And for 12 years, the young people of this nation have been told that we'll be protected. The same thing we were told about climate change, the housing crisis, the 2008 recession, crippling debt, student loans. In our lifetimes, we have to fix these issues. In our lifetimes, we must fix the border crisis. The solution is not mass deportations. The solution is not to completely remove all security from the border. We have to create humane, common-sense solutions that prevent human trafficking while also providing an easier path to citizenship into the greatest nation on earth. In our lifetimes, we have to guarantee the right to marry to all Americans because no consenting adults should be barred from the dignity of the law. In our lifetimes, we have to balance our budget and reduce our national debt because the full faith and credit of the United States federal government should never be called into question. In our lifetimes, we must reform the welfare system in a way that prioritizes both providing care and giving individuals a pathway back to employment and prosperity. In our lifetimes, we must reform our healthcare system in a way that prioritizes the well-being of patients, not pocketbooks. My diabetic sister shouldn't have to pay so much for a vial of insulin that costs Eli Lilly or Novo Nordisk $2 to $10 to manufacture. In our lifetimes, we must guarantee workers the right to safe workplaces and fair wages. We must guarantee consumers the right to know what they are buying and not be cheated by corporate price gouging. In our lifetimes, we must return manufacturing to the United States. In our lifetimes, we must lower federal income taxes on the lower and middle classes and replace them with capital gains taxes on the wealthy. And we have to go over those offshore bank accounts as well. Here's the part where I'm going to be a little more honest than many other progressives. I understand that a lot of Americans don't like talking about these programs because Europeans have them and they have to pay higher taxes. But I'd also like you to consider that the average American is in a considerable amount of debt. Debt that would almost disappear if you didn't have to pay the hospital $100 for a single tablet of Tylenol. On the topic of debt, in our lifetimes, we have to reduce the burden of overpriced education on American students. In our lifetimes, we have to reform policing to be less militaristic and more focused on community service. I'm not advocating for defunding anything. I merely believe that we should take common sense steps to reform officer training because what happened to Breonna Taylor should not happen to anyone, particularly not in this country. Many of the issues that I bring up tonight are going to be blamed on the Republican Party, and to a degree that is fair. But I would remind you that Republicans aren't the only ones who've ever held public office. Some of these could also be blamed on Democrats throughout the years. They also hold blame for the failure of our modern politics, because both parties have perpetuated the system that George Washington warned us about, where two large factions would control all of our political discourse, only serving their own power and retaliation against the other. In our lifetimes, we must save our country from the jaws of extremism and adopt a more pragmatic solution to our national conversation. If we weren't so busy with our petty issues and our petty bickering, then we could have already solved climate change or gun control or the border crisis or student debt or a lot of these other problems, but we were too busy arguing to actually do anything. That reality is what causes me to approach politics as a pragmatist. Nevertheless, I do align myself more with progressive values, which I understand doesn't exactly make me the most popular man in South Carolina. We're often told as progressives that our values are very un-American. We're led to believe that the conservatives are heir apparent to the founding fathers and Abraham Lincoln, that the successors to George Washington now believe that the president should be above the law, that the successors to Abraham Lincoln now fly Confederate flags, and that the successors to Dr. King are now the same people who want to ban books about him from public school libraries. We are even told that our values as progressives aren't very Christian or Christ-like. But I'd like to quote Christ himself when I say, "I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in." In other words, I do believe that the man who fed the 5,000 would want to feed our children too. And I don't appreciate when his name is invoked to defend someone like Donald Trump, who doesn't understand the irony of using military forces against peaceful protesters so that he can go have his picture made holding a Bible in front of a church. We are similarly told as progressives that our values aren't very South Carolinian. And here's the one where on the surface they seem to be a little right. We don't come from the same political tradition as John C. Calhoun or Ben Tillman or Strom Thurmond or even Henry McMaster. Our values are nevertheless about as South Carolinian as I can imagine. In a state with the second highest rate of medical debt in our country, don't you think we should have Medicaid expansion? Don't you think that we should lower the cost of prescription medication? In a state with crumbling infrastructure and famously terrible roads, shouldn't we invest in public works? In a state with the majority support of same-sex marriage, shouldn't that position be enshrined into law? In a state with new manufacturing jobs, shouldn't we guarantee fair wages and better workplace conditions to those workers? Or in a state similarly booming with agricultural jobs, shouldn't we try to improve conditions for farm workers and buy local? In a state where we watched 9 of our fellow South Carolinians lose their lives to gun violence and hatred while at church in 2015, we don't need open carry, but we do need hate crime laws. In a region known for our supposed Southern hospitality and charm, don't we need to abandon the hateful rhetoric of people like Donald Trump? Because what's more patriotic than looking out at your country and thinking that it deserves better? We're not dealing with politics as usual right now. We're not dealing with politics as usual when a presidential nominee says that he'd like to be a, quote, dictator on day one. We're not dealing with politics as usual when a Supreme Court has justices who accept bribes and then their spouses help plot military coups. We're not dealing with politics as usual when the nominee of a major party has been found criminally guilty of fraud and civilly liable of abuse. We're not dealing with politics as usual when we have to worry about Project 2025. We're not dealing with politics as usual when a presidential nominee advocates for a 10% tariff on all foreign imports, which would drive up inflation and it would tank the American economy. We're not dealing with politics as usual when a president appoints his unqualified family members to top roles in his administration. We're not dealing with politics as usual when a president tries to ban Muslims or refers to white supremacists as being very fine people. We are not dealing with politics as usual when a president refers to his enemies as vermin or enemies of the people, or he refers to immigrants as poisoning the blood of our country, directly echoing the language of the Nazi Party. We are not dealing with politics as usual when state senators go to Columbia and say that Greenwood County schools have litter boxes in their bathrooms, or our unqualified state superintendent of education calls for the dissolution of the public education system in favor of church-run micro schools. This is not normal. A week ago, we celebrated the 4th of July, the day in 1776 when our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. For 248 years, our system of government has been the envy of the world, and the reason is clear. The American system of government, the very idea is civic duty, the idea that all Americans must stand up for one another, that we must build a nation where not only are all created equal, but all are treated as equal. We've never fully lived up to that idea, but we will never surrender it. President Lincoln once referred to this nation as the last good hope of man on earth. In Federalist No. 1, Alexander Hamilton said that it's been frequently remarked that it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country, by their conduct and example, to decide whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. This idea is today understood by, of all people, Vladimir Putin, who points to supposed corruptions in the American government as evidence that there is no good government on earth, that good government is not possible. That's why it's so dangerous when someone like Donald Trump sits up there and says, what, you think this country's so innocent? When he's informed that Putin has journalists disappear who've said inaccurate things about him. Compared to Putin, I do think this country is innocent. And either way, it's clear that this country is the experiment of whether or not good government is really possible. If you feel otherwise, I'm scared we're not going to agree on a lot else. That's why I am politically comfortable with conservatives like my father, or Liz Cheney, or Katrina Shealy, who above all else in politics value service to others and their country, because this is their nation too. And I would like for all Americans, Republican or Democrat, partisan or independent, left or right, white or black, Asian or Latino, male or female, gay or straight, religious or not, to take part in the next great chapter of the American story. I'm not asking you to believe in me. I'm not asking you to believe in Joe Biden. I'm not asking you to believe in the Democratic Party. And I'm going to be the first person who's ever told you, I'm not asking you to believe in yourself. I'm asking you to believe in one another. Because in a republic like ours, there is no greater title than citizen. The issue facing our nation is not an issue of leadership, it's an issue of belief. Republic or dictatorship, freedom or tyranny, equality or oppression, order or chaos. These are the issues of our time. These are the issues of our crisis and confidence. It's up to us, not as Democrats, but as Americans, to stand up for our beliefs, to stand up for the greatest system of government and the greatest citizens on earth, because I believe in our republic. I believe in freedom. I believe in equal justice under law. I believe that we can be pro-business and we can be pro-worker. I believe that we can make billionaires pay their fair share and we can reduce the financial burden on the middle class. I believe that in the wealthiest nation on earth, no diabetic should have to go into debt paying for their insulin. No cancer patient should go into debt paying for their chemotherapy. No student should go into debt paying for their education. And I include trade schools in that too, because our country needs plumbers and electricians just as much as we need lawyers and doctors. I believe that we can provide for our citizens and we can balance our budget. I believe that if you truly want to make America great, there is no again. You don't look to the past for your vision, you look forward to the future. I believe that it's a responsibility of all humans to care for the people, the planet, and themselves. I believe that we can save our planet from climate change. I believe that we can save our people from gun violence. I believe that in our lifetimes, we can achieve world peace. I believe that in our lifetimes, we can become the leaders of the world again, this time through collaboration, not through coercion. I believe that the people of this nation deserve a government as good as they are, because above all else, I believe in America. I believe in all of America. This country is the light of the world. Our city on a hill should not be hidden. I believe that we can still be fired up and ready to go do the right thing. I believe that we can do it because we've already done it before. I believe we can fight for a great society again. I believe that in our lifetimes, we can build a country for all Americans because it's in our very name. We're the United States of America. And out of many, we are one. Thank you, and God bless America.
Jonah. You forgot to drop the mic. Here you go, buddy. You know, I've received criticism that we don't have a large youth presence. We don't hear from the youth. Now you see why. They make us old fogies look bad. That was amazing. He left nothing on the table. Left nothing. So wonderful. Thank you. And if I'm not mistaken, you're giving the keynote speech at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in a couple of weeks. If not, I'm sending them a video clip. All right. Well, I expect great things from Jonah. We'll keep an eye out on his career as he progresses, and we'll definitely have you back. So thank you, Jonah.